Collapse never begins with explosions. It begins with silence, a grid failure that lasts too long, a supply chain delay that becomes permanent, a communication outage that spreads faster than the truth. Every historical breakdown follows the same mechanical sequence. Energy dies first, information fractures next, then logistics implode, then crowds mutate under pressure, and finally violence rises to fill the vacuum. Civilians cling to assumptions, operators watch for patterns, and the pattern is always the same. In every collapse, the power structure moves early to suppress one category of threat: individual autonomy. Not through open bans, but through scarcity, licensing, dependency, and propaganda. The Off-Grid Blacklist is not written on paper, yet it governs every crisis. It is the set of technologies that transform a passive civilian into a self-sufficient node, capable of generating power, seeing in the dark, communicating outside the system, manufacturing what supply chains can no longer deliver, and resisting predation when institutions retreat. History is blunt. In Sarajevo, the families with generators survived winters others couldn't. In Puerto Rico, those with independent comms coordinated, while neighborhoods starved for information. In every war zone, those who could see after sundown controlled movement, food, and survival. Autonomy rewrites fate. That is why these tools are discouraged before disaster, not after. The 5 technologies on this blacklist are the ones they hope you never obtain, because once the system collapses, ownership becomes impossible. You either have them before SHTF or you never will. Energy is the first layer of power in any collapse. When the grid dies, every system that civilians depend on, water pressure, refrigeration, communication, mobility, medical devices, dies with it. Collapse physics is simple. Once generation drops below demand, the grid enters cascade failure. Transformers overload, substations trip. The blackout that begins as an inconvenience becomes a structural death spiral that no authority can reverse. That is why governments never want civilians to possess technologies that create autonomous, silent, untrackable energy loops. They fear any household capable of producing power without connecting to the grid, because in a crisis, those households no longer depend on the state to survive. Energy autonomy begins with micro-solar systems that operate below detection. Not the rooftop arrays advertised to the public, but modular panels stored until needed, deployed only when extraction risk is low. In Bosnia, the families who hid compact panels instead of displaying them avoided raids. Panels left in the open were stolen within days. Silent micro-wind units performed the same function in rural zones, using night breezes to charge covert battery banks. Kinetic chargers, tools powered by human movement, kept radios alive when sunlight disappeared for weeks. Those who controlled their own electricity controlled their own information, their own decisions, their own mobility. The system despises silent generators most of all. Fuel-based generators expose you through sound, heat, and smell. But solid-state generators, using stored energy, not combustion, remove those signatures. During the Venezuelan blackouts, families with silent storage units kept medical devices running, while neighbors waited for state distributions that never came. These units erased the leverage authorities rely on, the leverage of need. Once you have power that no one can cut, you step outside the civilian category. Energy storage is the second battlefield. Regular batteries decay, leak, and fail under temperature stress. High-density, long-life storage banks change everything. They allow refrigeration when food scarcity hits. They protect medicine when supply chains collapse. They let you purify water, run tools, and maintain night observation systems. In Ukraine's early fighting, civilians with hardened battery systems moved information, relocated families, and navigated danger zones while others sat blind. Energy is not convenience. Energy is movement. Movement is survival. The third layer is energy discipline. Generating power is meaningless if your signatures expose you. Collapse predators hunt noise, light, and routine. A single visible glow through a window advertised resources in Haiti's earthquake aftermath. A single humming motor led looters to isolated homes in Lebanon's grid collapse. Controlled power means controlled emissions. You generate at irregular intervals. You charge during periods of atmospheric noise. You run devices only when concealment is guaranteed. Energy must be treated like ammunition. Valuable, limited, never wasted, never flaunted. Authorities discourage all of this technology because it breaks the dependency chain. When civilians have power, they do not gather at aid centers. They do not obey curfews designed to manage fear. They do not wait for instructions broadcast from compromised infrastructure. They operate independently. That independence threatens organizational control more than weapons ever could. A household with autonomous electricity becomes a microbase. A neighborhood with multiple households like that becomes an off-grid network. History shows that every regime fears anything that decentralizes capability. Your objective in a collapse is simple: acquire, hide, and harden energy technology before the event. Once SHTF begins, these tools vanish instantly. The market collapses, borders close, transportation halts. Anyone selling energy tech becomes prey. The only power system you can trust is the one that is already in your hands, already concealed, already configured, already tested under real load. When the grid dies, the world divides into two groups: those who generate energy and those who beg for it. Only one of them survives the long collapse. Darkness is the equalizer of civilians, but not of survivors. In every collapse, the moment the sun drops, the rules change. Human predators prefer night because it erases witnesses, compresses reaction time, and turns every mistake into fatal error. The psychology is predictable: the desperate move at dawn, the organized move at noon, the violent move at night. Those who can see in darkness dominate all three. That is why authorities quietly restrict thermal optics, night vision systems, drones, and advanced perimeter sensors. They are not afraid these tools will be misused. They are afraid civilians will stop being blind. In Iraq's urban warfare, the side with night vision dictated movement. In Sarajevo, snipers waited until darkness to cross open streets because that was the only time they could trust what they saw. In the Greek refugee corridors, families without any night perception walked into ambushes, while those with even basic infrared survived. Seeing in the dark is not an advantage. It is a barrier between life and death. Night vision provides shape. Thermal provides certainty. Civilians underestimate the difference. Night vision tells you someone is there. Thermal tells you whether they are alive, hiding, armed, or waiting. Thermal cuts through smoke, fog, and brush. It reveals footprints in cold mud, freshly touched door handles, and breathing behind thin walls. That level of perception is a threat to any authority because it erases their informational dominance. When a civilian can detect heat signatures through vegetation at 200 meters, they no longer rely on police, checkpoints, or patrols. They rely on physics. Drones extend the perimeter outward. A small quadcopter with silent props can map choke points, identify approaching groups, and detect movement behavior before it reaches your street. Collapse crowds are predictable. They follow noise, light, and smell. A drone flown at low altitude just beyond property lines reveals where those patterns form. During the Donbass escalation, civilians who used drones were able to plan evacuation routes hours before artillery zones shifted. Equipment equals foresight. Foresight equals survival. But perception systems are not only about observation, they are about preventing surprise. Refugee ambush data from 2015-2022 shows one constant. Those caught were always those who lacked early warning. A simple passive infrared sensor placed on a doorframe gave families in Aleppo the difference between preparing for intrusion and being overwhelmed in their sleep. A seismic ground sensor buried under loose soil alerted rural Venezuelan households to approaching motorcycles long before engines could be heard. These tools remove the predator's greatest asset, the first strike. Authorities resist civilian access to such devices because surveillance is a form of control. When only the state can see, the state dictates movement. When civilians can see just as far, the authority hierarchy collapses. A population with thermal, night vision, drones, and perimeter sensors is no longer passive. It becomes a distributed detection grid. Power structures cannot govern what they cannot monitor from above, but owning these tools is not enough. Deployment must be covert. Night vision is used only behind blackout curtains. Thermal units are cooled before storage to avoid condensation betrayal. Drones are flown from concealed launch points, never from your home's center of mass. Sensors are placed irregularly so patterns cannot be learned. Observation must leave no signature, no sound, no light, no repeated timing. Predators study routine more than territory. In every collapse zone, the survivors who lasted the longest were not the strongest, the fastest, or the most armed. They were the ones who saw danger before it formed. They mapped threats in darkness. They read heat where others saw nothing. They eliminated uncertainty until the environment became predictable, not chaotic. To see in the dark is to live in the dark. Without these tools, you move blind. And in a collapse, blindness is a death sentence waiting for its moment. Communication is the skeleton of survival. When it fails, coordination collapses. And when coordination collapses, groups fragment into isolated units that cannot predict danger, share resources, or navigate shifting threats. Authorities understand this more clearly than civilians. That is why every government in every crisis defends one monopoly above all others: the monopoly on information flow. They do not fear weapons. They fear civilians who can communicate without them. Independent communication systems, HF, VHF, UHF radios, encrypted digital modes, mesh networks, off-grid repeaters are the technologies they never want you to own before SHTF, because once civilians can talk without permission, control dissolves. The failure pattern is consistent. Haiti's earthquake severed telecoms in a single hour and turned millions into informational hostages. Those with radios formed micro-networks that coordinated evacuations, bypassed blocked roads, and located supplies long before official aid arrived. In the California wildfire evacuations, households with scanners and mesh nodes knew when shifts in wind would cut off escape routes, while others waited for delayed text alerts that arrived after the roads were already on fire. In Ukraine's first 72 hours, families with HF units could hear where lines were breaking. Those without had no sense of direction. Communication determines who moves first. First movement determines who survives. Authorities restrict these tools because communication erases hierarchy. A family with a long-range HF set becomes its own information center. A neighborhood equipped with mesh nodes becomes a decentralized network operating beyond state control. Encryption magnifies the threat. Messages become unmonitorable. Patterns become invisible. Coordination becomes silent. Governments cannot manage a population that can organize itself. That is why licenses, frequencies, and power limits exist, not for safety, but for predictability. Collapse communication is governed by physics, not hope. Radio waves travel through terrain, weather, and structures in ways civilians never consider. HF bounces off the ionosphere, allowing thousands of kilometers of reach when the atmosphere is stable. VHF cuts through urban canyons but dies in forests. UHF thrives in confined spaces but loses range in open valleys. Mesh networks function only when enough nodes exist to hop data without collapse. During grid-down events, understanding these physical laws separates those who can communicate from those who simply own radios. But communication is also a signature. Every transmission is a beacon. Burst communication is the only method that keeps you alive. Transmit fast, transmit rarely, transmit unpredictably. In Bosnia, families who left radios on continuous receive eventually drew scavengers who traced the glow of the screen or the faint static at night. In Venezuela, operators who transmitted at the same time each evening were triangulated and robbed. Collapse rules are harsh. Your transmission invites attention. Your silence invites hunters. Controlled bursts create uncertainty, and uncertainty keeps predators away. Your communication network must exist on multiple layers. Short-range analog for local coordination. Mid-range VHF-UHF for movement tracking and resource updates. Long-range HF for regional intelligence when the internet and telecoms vanish. Mesh nodes powered by hidden battery banks allow silent, passive information transfer without broadcasting. A secondary layer, paper codes, timed signals, dead drops, allows communication even when electronics fail. Redundancy is survival. Authorities fear this layered independence because it dismantles the core of crisis management. If civilians can bypass official broadcasts, they stop waiting for orders. If neighborhoods can coordinate without police, they stop obeying curfews. If families can track movement of crowds or armed groups, panic no longer serves as a tool of control. The system maintains power only through managed information scarcity. Once the grid collapses, markets evaporate, radios vanish, batteries disappear, antennas become contraband. The only communication system that matters is the one already prepared, already hidden, already tested under real atmospheric conditions, and already integrated into a survival plan. In a collapse, silence is not safety. Silence is blindness. Communication is the one force that turns chaos into a map, and a map into a way out. Collapse exposes a truth civilians never see. Supply chains are illusions held together by fuel, coordination, and time. Once any of those variables fail, the flow of tools, spare parts, repair materials, and basic components stops instantly. What remains is scarcity, not temporary, but structural. In that environment, survival belongs to whoever can fabricate, modify, or restore what others discard. Micromanufacturing becomes a form of sovereignty. That is why authorities dislike civilians owning compact CNC routers, portable welders, 3D printers, precision sharpening systems, metalworking kits, and chemical fabrication tools. These are not machines. They are independence engines. The moment you can repair what breaks, create what's missing, or replicate what the system meant to control, you become ungovernable. The physics of scarcity is harsh. A machete dulls in a week of real use, a hinge rusts, a generator belt snaps, water filters clog. Without replacement parts, every tool decays into dead weight. During Cuba's special period, collapse forced civilians to transition from consumers to fabricators. Bicycles were rebuilt from scrap metal. Engine parts were cast in backyard furnaces. Plastic gears were reproduced using improvised molds. The state could not control those who manufactured quietly. It could only ration those who waited helplessly. Syria's survival workshops followed the same pattern. When supply chains evaporated, small groups with welders, grinders, and simple lathes produced stoves, brackets, vehicle parts, filtration housings, and improvised energy modules. Micromanufacturing was not accessory. It was the core of endurance. Portable welding systems are the first tier of autonomy. They restore structural integrity, create hinges, reinforce doors, build frames, repair blades, and fabricate mounts for optics or solar panels. In Sarajevo, households with welding capability reconstructed broken piping to reroute captured rainwater into sheltered basements. Those without drank contaminated runoff. Welding is not a trade in collapse. It is a force multiplier. Precision sharpening and metalworking kits form the second tier. Edge maintenance changed survival outcomes more than weapons did in multiple conflicts. A dull tool increases energy expenditure. Increased energy expenditure accelerates starvation. In Yemen, families who maintained agricultural blades lasted through seasons when others exhausted themselves in the fields. Sharpening systems also support improvised defense. An edge restored to factory geometry becomes decisive in close conflict zones where ammunition is scarce. The third tier is advanced micromanufacturing, compact CNC units and 3D printers. CNC routers carve wood, aluminum, and composites into brackets, housings, gears, latch systems, and repair components for tools now impossible to replace. A small CNC in Donetsk kept an entire apartment block's water pumps functional by cutting replacement impellers from salvaged plastic. 3D printers, when paired with filament stock hidden before the collapse, generate medical splints, container lids, water purifier threads, and low-stress mechanical parts. Their true value emerges only when everything standardized disappears. Chemical fabrication is the silent frontier. Civilians underestimate how quickly lubricants, sealants, adhesives, and cleaning agents vanish. Without lubrication, tools seize. Without sealants, water infiltration destroys stores. Without disinfectants, wounds become fatal. Basic chemistry reclaims advantage, rendering animal fat into soap, distilling alcohol for sterilization, producing simple adhesives, and extracting oils. These processes kept Balkan rural households operational when industrial goods ran out. Chemical capability is not optional. It is the glue that holds every other tool together. Authorities resist civilian micromanufacturing because it erases dependency. When you can produce your own parts, the system cannot motivate you with shortage. When you can repair your equipment, you do not line up for state distribution. When you fabricate components that were never intended to be in civilian hands, you bypass restrictions entirely. A population that manufactures is a population no longer bound to controlled supply lines. But micromanufacturing must be concealed. Noise attracts scavengers. Heat signatures draw attention. Light reveals activity patterns. Fabrication occurs during high-noise periods, storms, crowd movement, distant conflict. Tools are stored in sealed containers with desiccant to prevent rust. Filament, oils, and adhesives are rationed like medicine. Waste is hidden because even scrap reveals capability. Survival does not reward consumers, it rewards makers. Collapse divides people into two classes: those who wait for something to be delivered and those who build what no longer exists. Only one group endures the long collapse. Defense is not about force. It is about being untouchable, hard to find, hard to track, hard to trap. In every collapse, civilians cling to weapons while operators focus on something else entirely: protection, mobility, concealment. These are the technologies authorities hate because they eliminate vulnerability. Once a person becomes difficult to injure, difficult to locate, and difficult to intercept, they stop behaving like a dependent civilian and start behaving like an autonomous unit. That shift destroys control. Ballistic armor, improvised plating systems, adaptive camouflage, silent mobility gear, and CBRN protection form the last red line of the Off-Grid Blacklist. Not because they are offensive, but because they cancel the leverage of fear. Ballistic protection changes survival math instantly. In Sarajevo, those who owned even rudimentary armor moved between buildings while others waited for darkness. A ceramic plate absorbs the first catastrophic error. An unseen sniper, a stray round, a panicked crowd firing blindly. Armor is not about fighting. It is about absorbing the moment when fate collapses. Authorities restrict armor because it neutralizes the compliance effect of threat. A population that cannot be easily injured is a population that cannot be easily controlled. Improvised armor engineering extends this advantage. Steel, cut from appliances, layered composites, resin-hardened panels, and flexible Kevlar inserts can transform a door, a vest, or a backpack into life-saving barriers. In Mexico's cartel zones, self-defense groups used improvised plating to protect vehicles against small arms fire, giving them mobility when the roads became kill corridors. In Ukraine's early fighting, civilians reinforced stairwells, hallways, and balconies to create safe movement lanes inside buildings. Improvised armor turns fragile spaces into predictable ones. Predictability is survival. Adaptive camouflage is the second pillar. Collapse predators hunt with eyes first. They search for contrast, symmetry, shine, and movement. Camouflage systems, whether commercial patterns or improvised textiles, break these signatures. But advanced camouflage goes further. Thermal-reducing blankets disrupt heat signatures. Multi-layer ghillies distort human outlines. Matte coatings erase reflection. In conflict zones, families survived by making their homes visually identical to abandoned structures. They removed identifiable patterns, blocked windows, and disrupted the silhouette of anything valuable. Camouflage is not about hiding. It is about blending so completely that hunting becomes inefficient. Silent mobility changes the battlefield. In every collapse, sound becomes a target. Footsteps, zippers, vehicle engines, rattling gear, each sound is a direction marker. Silent bicycles, padded shoes, rubberized carts, and low-signature backpacks allowed civilians in Aleppo and Mosul to move across open streets without attracting fire. In Venezuela, silent mountain bikes replaced cars when checkpoints turned predatory. Silent mobility makes you unpredictable. Predictability is lethal. The highest tier of untouchability is CBRN protection. Chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. Civilians treat these threats as abstract. They are not. Industrial fires release toxic particulates. Flooded sewers send airborne pathogens into dense zones. Burning plastics generate carcinogenic clouds. Conflict exposes populations to improvised chemical agents. In every one of these scenarios, those with respirators, sealed goggles, filtration masks, and decontamination routines survived exposures that killed others slowly and silently. Authorities downplay CBRN gear because it narrows their ability to use area denial, tear gas, and environmental pressure as tools of control. Becoming untouchable means reducing your signature across all dimensions: visual, thermal, acoustic, chemical. You must move like a ghost, present but untraceable. Armor is hidden under loose layers. Thermal blankets are stored in reach but never displayed. Mobility gear is silent, padded, and secured. Masks are kept sealed in opaque containers to avoid degradation. Your existence must generate as little information as possible. Threat actors, criminal, military, or desperate, hunt information first. You eliminate survival threats by eliminating the data they use. Authorities fear these technologies because they turn a single individual into an ungovernable problem. Someone who can avoid detection, resist injury, move without sound, and survive toxic environments does not rely on shelters, checkpoints, or state-managed corridors. They navigate independently. They endure independently. They escape independently. And independence is the one condition a collapsing system cannot tolerate. In the long collapse, the vulnerable die early. The detectable die next. The predictable die last. The untouchable endure. Collapse is not chaos. It is mathematics. Systems fail in predictable sequences, and populations respond in predictable patterns. The Off-Grid Blacklist exists because authorities understand these equations long before civilians do. Energy autonomy breaks dependency. Night perception breaks ambush cycles. Independent communication breaks informational control. Micromanufacturing breaks supply chain leverage. Armor, camouflage, and protection break compliance, enforced through fear. These technologies are suppressed not because they are dangerous, but because they make you self-sufficient in a world designed to keep you reliant. History delivers one verdict. When disaster strikes, acquisition becomes impossible, markets empty, borders close, movement becomes lethal. Anything not already in your possession is gone forever. The families who survived Sarajevo's winters, Cuba's shortages, Ukraine's bombardments, Haiti's silence, and Venezuela's blackouts all shared a single advantage. They had the right tools before the system collapsed. Once SHTF begins, there is no negotiation with physics. There is no bargaining with scarcity. There is no adapting to threats you cannot see, anticipate, or withstand. You either enter the collapse with the technologies they never wanted you to own, or you face it blind, unprotected, and dependent. Preparedness is not optimism. It is the only form of control left when the world stops working.